Alderman Kennedy, Alderman Boyd, Alderwoman Howard,
Aye. Present.
Alderman Arnowitz, Alderwoman Hubbard, Alderwoman Murphy,
Here.
Alderman Ogilvy, Alderwoman Navarro,
Here.
Alderwoman Middlebrook, Chairman Vaccaro,
Present.
Alderman Kennedy.
He asked to be excused.
Okay. Alderman Boyd,
Asked to be excused.
all right, and then Alderwoman Hubbard.
Asked to be excused,
Okay.
and so did Alderman Arnowitz, but he's over there, so.
All right, you have a quorum.
Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start with the sponsor and her guests. Then I'm going to bring the city attorney up and the health department. And then we're going to go with public testimony. I would ask that no matter how you feel, one way or the other, I don't want to hear any ohs or oohs or ahs. Let's get through this in a very way that is smooth. Give everybody a chance to speak on this, okay? The majority of everybody on the list, which I knew that would be the case, are on the pro side, and I knew that would be the case from the Facebook and all that. And again, there will be another meeting because the chief of police could not come tonight. So, Alderwoman Green, if you want to come up and then introduce the people you have that you want to testify. We're not going to take committee subs or anything tonight, but I do want to allow your people that want to testify, the ones you're experts, to have, what do you feel would be reasonable?
I think all of my experts are signed up.
I mean, do you want to bring them up or just let them come
I
up?
think just let them come up. It doesn't, I don't think the order necessarily
Well, because
matters.
there's not that many people, so I think we don't, I was going to try to keep most of the testimony under 2 minutes, except for whoever your experts are, and I thought I would allow them a little bit more time to actually speak on this.
Okay.
Okay, so in that case, if you don't have anybody you want to bring up first, I guess I'll start with the couple, city attorney, the health department, and then we can just rock and roll from there.
Sure. I think, as we go down the list there, I mean, the ACLU probably needs a little bit more time, and there's probably a couple in there that
That's
need a
fine.
little bit more time.
And if
but-
there are, just say, I'd like them to have more time.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
A lot of the public testimony is going to be pretty similar, I assume, except for the experts.
Right.
And the experts, I think we should allow them more time.
Okay.
So.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
well, then, let me start with the city attorney, Julian Bush, if you'd come up and, introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do.
All right, my name's Julian Bush. I'm the city councilor. I was just given this board bill this afternoon to take a quick look at it, so all of my remarks are going to be tentative remarks, and they'll probably be a little bit disjointed, but I am disturbed by the bill as I've read it. I have no quarrel with the purpose behind the board bill. If I was a member of the General Assembly, I would vote to legalize marijuana. But I'm not a member of the General Assembly. I'm a lawyer. I've looked at this board bill, and there's much in it that troubles me. I'm just going to give you a few of the things. And again, I've just spent a few moments looking at the bill this afternoon. First of all, as I read the bill, it would prohibit the use of the Civil Courts Building and the Carnacan Courthouse, both buildings owned by the city of St. Louis, to conduct state trials of marijuana. I don't believe that that could be lawfully done by the city of St. Louis. The state of Missouri, in its wisdom, has made marijuana, a possession of marijuana, a crime, and that crime is prosecuted in the state courts. The city of St. Louis, as other counties, is required to provide a courthouse for those prosecutions to take place. I don't think the city of St. Louis could prohibit prosecutions of possession of marijuana from taking place in those two city-owned buildings. Second, as I read this, it would require police officers of the city of St. Louis to commit crimes. It is a crime for a police officer to refuse to execute a warrant that's been issued lawfully. Now, there is some language in here that provides that an exception that city employees can take acts that are directed at them by court order, but there are warrants that are not issued by court order. Probation officers and parole officers issue warrants, and they issue warrants for probationers who possess marijuana. A police officer who abided by this bill, if it became an ordinance, would be committing a crime. That's something I think that ought to concern us all. Likewise, this board bill would seem to prohibit police officers from responding to subpoenas to testify in cases involving the possession of marijuana. And again, subpoenas are not issued by court order, so that wouldn't come within the exception. It's very troubling. And it's not outside the realm of possibility that because of these defects in the ordinances that apply to the courthouses and to the police officers, I say this with some trepidation, but there is a crime called hindering a prosecution. And a person who, for the purpose of preventing the prosecution of another person for conduct constituting a crime, commits a crime himself if that person prevents or obstructs the prosecution, obstructs performing an act that might aid in discovery or apprehension of such a person. It is not without the realm of possibility that the members of the Board of Aldermen might be committing the crime of hindering prosecution if the Board of Aldermen punishes people, which is what this board bill does, if it punishes police officers for arresting persons possessing marijuana or testifying in prosecutions of marijuana. So this is a quick look, but I've looked at it, but my very quick examination of this board bill gives me a lot of worry, a lot of concern.
What I would ask is, even of the sponsor, that if you would get together before the next meeting, review, and at least kind of talk to and see where we're at. So I have a lot of concerns myself. Concerns that it's just going to be something that we do and it's going to end up being litigated for a long time. I had suggested at the very beginning of all this that we should do a resolution, send it to the state, similar to what we did with the audit, asking the state, or at least letting the state know that the city would support legislation moving forward on it. They can do that, I guess. I don't know what laws they would be going against federally, but I have a lot of concerns. This is just going to end up in court if we try it anyway.
Well, I'm not concerned about ending up in court, but I'm concerned about city employees being prosecuted for crimes. Right. By abiding by this board bill. I would agree with you. It'd be perfectly appropriate for the Board of Aldermen to adopt a resolution indicating what its sentiments are to this General Assembly. It also would probably be appropriate for the Board of Aldermen to express its view, if it is the Board of Aldermen's view, to the police division, that they would prefer to have marijuana crimes prosecuted at a lower priority than other crimes. I think the police department already does that, but it would certainly be appropriate for the Board of Aldermen to express its opinion about those things.
Well, let me go down the list in case. Alderwoman Howard, any questions?
Excuse me. I guess my only question would be about the unlawful employment practice for an employer to refuse to hire, where an employer can be held, can terminate or will be found, illegal if they refuse to hire somebody before drug testing. That seems a little bit of an overreach.
Well, my preliminary judgment about that, and this is just a preliminary judgment, I have not had a lot of time to examine this, is that that would be within the authority of the City of St. Louis. Just as the City of St. Louis makes it a violation of an ordinance to discriminate against a person for on the basis of their race, their religion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I would suppose it would be within the authority of the Board of Aldermen to prohibit employers from discriminating against prospective employees, or their current employees on the basis of certain kinds of marijuana convictions. Probably, if that's what all you want to do, it'd probably be better to amend the Civil Rights Ordinance that prohibits other kinds of discrimination. But my preliminary judgment is that that is within the lawful authority of the city of St. Louis.
Okay.
Whether it's expedient or not, I express no view.
You're just
I'm just a
speaking
lawyer.
to the
I'm just a
legality of
lawyer.
it. Okay, thank you.
Alderman Arnowitz. Any
I'm
questions?
tuned up tonight.
Must have been with some good beans. Mr. Bush, how you doing? Long time no see.
Good to see you.
My only questions is, you know, St. Louis is behind 99% of the cities by 10 years.
Well, no, it's-
Seems when Colorado put it together and a few other states, seems to be working out fine. My big concern is, so if we pass this in the city of St. Louis, we're probably going to end up back in court again, same as we did with the minimum wage, and we've seen where that went. Said that our ordinance can't supersede state ordinance or our laws. And then I was just amazed at how many of our legislators who was screaming about raising the minimum wage just kind of let it die after it lost in court. So, you know, I don't know, you know, if it gets challenged. I'm sure it does in court. And if we lose the battle, then what happens? Certainly the state has more teeth in this and can pass things for the state of Missouri. So, I mean, I'm not against it, but, you know, I'm tired of us going to court and losing, and then nobody else picks up the fight on the state end. So I guess that's where I'm at on that. I think actually it's a city ordinance right now. It's a misdemeanor for, is it 32 grams?
32 or under, it's a $25 fine.
So you can have a little over an ounce on you. And I know in this bill wants to make it 2 ounces. I don't have $600 to spend on 2 ounces. I know what it sells for. But, I mean, you know, there's no doubt it needs some work. And my personal opinion is I'm for it, but I think it needs to be done in the state legislation down in Jefferson City, only because it's going to end up in court. And I just hate to see that. We just need to do it the right way. So I guess I was asking your opinion. Do you think this would end up in court if it passed in the city?
I think it's likely to end up in court, but I think the greater danger is there will be city employees who will be prosecuted for crimes. I mean, I'm very happy to litigate the validity of the ordinance. The worst that can happen is you lose. But what if you're a police officer who's been given a warrant to arrest somebody on a marijuana charge? It's a crime not to execute that warrant, but you have an ordinance that punishes the police officer if he executes that warrant. That's my gravest concern.
And that's why I say, I mean, I get where the bill's trying to go. I just think we have to really work through this and get it right, you know, to make it work. And I don't know if that would happen from here, or does it have to happen in Jefferson City?
I think everybody would say the Jefferson City solution is the best solution. I think the reason that this committee is considering this matter is because Jefferson City has maintained the status quo, but not every change is a change for the better. And I think there's much peril in this legislation.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Alderwoman Murphy.
I just have a question on the employment part also. It says that, you know, you said you weren't too concerned about that. Who do you think that would apply to? It says except for the bona fide occupational requirement, you know, that's responsible. So that would mean all emergency workers, anyone that's like on call for 24 hours?
It's very vague.
Nurses, doctors?
It's vague, but it's not unusual in that respect. I mean, there's lots of civil rights legislation and laws in the books that make exceptions that are similar to that, and you kind of proceed on a case-by-case basis. But it's not without problems. If you're an employer, you are allowed to do what's reasonable, but you have somebody second-guessing you as to what's reasonable. So there is a little discomfort that an employer would have with this kind of language, but it's not unusual in that respect.
Okay.
There's lots of laws like that.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Vice Chairman Scott Ogilvy?
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Bush. Couple questions. So, in my mind, this is not really a bill about marijuana. It's just a bill about sort of state statute preemption to me, because there's all the criminal state statutes are grouped together. Possession of marijuana is one of those, and this ordinance, this bill would prevent the city from enforcing one of the state laws, preempt the city from enforcing one of the state laws. In that whole list of criminal statutes, the state law that applies across the state, is there any example in Missouri that you're aware of a city preempting the enforcement of any criminal state statute?
I am unaware.
Okay. On the other hand, the concept of prosecutorial discretion is essentially absolute, correct?
Essentially absolute, yes.
Right. Meaning
Not
that,
absolute, but essentially absolute.
close enough for our purposes. Meaning that a prosecutor never has to issue a charge they don't want to issue against someone.
That's correct.
They never have to make a prosecution against somebody.
That's correct.
So the authority to de facto legalize marijuana possession already rests with the city's prosecutor.
It rests with the city's prosecutor, me, the city councilor, and the circuit attorney.
I meant to say circuit attorney when I said
If the
city
circuit
prosecutor.
attorney
Yes.
chose not to prosecute marijuana cases, that's for her to do in her judgment. That's her judgment. That's in her discretion, I agree.
Let's say that again so it's crystal clear.
Right.
If the circuit attorney chose to never prosecute a marijuana case going forward, that is 100% in her discretion right now without any ordinance that we pass.
That is my view.
Right.
Not something I've given a great deal of thought to, but it is generally held that prosecutors have discretion as to whether or not to prosecute people, and they exercise it every day.
They exercise it every day. Police
They probably
bring
did 2 dozen times today.
probable cause statements and evidence to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor, when I say prosecutor, I mean circuit attorney,
Yes.
Kimberly Gardner's office. The prosecutor who prosecutes state crimes, circuit attorney, makes decisions about which cases to issue charges on and prosecute, and which cases to not issue charges on and not prosecute. They make that decision every day.
Yes.
And it could be either a written or unwritten rule within the circuit attorney's office that they do not charge marijuana possession cases that are, let's say, standalone cases where there's not another crime involved.
I don't want to speak for the circuit attorney.
I'm not asking you to. I'm
I'm
just
not
saying-
disagreeing with what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to. I'm saying,
It's a general rule of law that prosecutors have absolute discretion. Not absolute. There are circumstances that would make their exercise of discretion unlawful. But as a general proposition, a prosecutor doesn't have to prosecute a crime he doesn't want to prosecute.
right, exactly. And that's fine. We accept that across the country is the way our criminal justice system works.
Yes.
Yes. And there are crimes that some prosecutors do not prosecute, ever.
I don't know.
Well, there are.
I do know, I've seen magazine articles that if you go back to like the New England states, they have laws in the books from 300 years ago that prohibit people from whistling in the streets, and the prosecutors never prosecute those kind of offenses.
And yet, right, and yet there's still laws.
Yes.
It's just that without changing the law, the culture changed and society changed, and prosecutors and circuit attorneys and district attorneys said, that's an area where it would be a waste of our time to spend our resources prosecuting these things, so we're not going to. And everybody's happy with that outcome.
I think that's generally true, but I think typically that's with respect to ordinance violations. I would think it would be an unusual circumstance where a prosecutor would choose categorically to refuse to prosecute people for a certain crime. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I think that would be an unusual circumstance.
I don't think it's that unusual.
That's my impression. My impression may be mistaken. I've never
I mean, I would say, like, you know, check out Boston and the church, you know. There was 30 years where there were no prosecutions despite evidence of, you know, a criminal conspiracy of abusing children, and the prosecutor wouldn't make any of those charges. So I think it happens actually fairly commonly that prosecutors decide there's going to be areas that they don't engage in.
I think Attorney General Holden did that. Holder did that with respect to drug offenses in certain states, marijuana offenses in certain states. He told his U.S. attorneys to exercise their discretion not to prosecute, or something close to that.
Right. That's a great parallel, actually. It's almost an exact parallel that the federal government, even as a written policy, the federal government said in states that have chosen to legalize marijuana, despite the fact that it's still a federal crime, we have a written policy to not prosecute possession of marijuana, you know, in those states, which they followed.
As a casual read of the newspaper,
Yeah.
I believe that's correct.
Right. I guess my last general comment for everybody here then, for me, is, I mean, my opinion is, like, culturally, most people, we've sort of moved on from caring about whether people smoke marijuana or not. I don't think the general public really cares. If people want to smoke, they don't want to smoke, nobody cares. But we are tasked with making laws, and we are tasked with making laws under the power that is essentially granted to us by state government, which is where some of our power comes from, and the city's charter, which is where some of our power comes from. And generally, state laws have precedence over local laws unless the state is silent in an area. What I've found in my 7 years here is that everybody loves local control when they disagree with the state law, and everybody hates local control when they agree with the state law. So you think the treasurer ought to handle parking? Well, the state law is supreme, and they're, you know, God forbid you try to change how we handle parking, because state statute says that's the treasurer's job, not the city's job. You think we should legalize marijuana? Well, we ought to have absolute control at the municipal level to make any laws we want about, you know, criminal statutes. So I think we all look at these things on just a case-by-case basis as to what we like in that case, what preference we have on some topic, and we don't really consider very much, you know, what our actual power and authority is. And so we end up with we end up contradicting ourselves a lot, is what I would say, just depending on the circumstances. And maybe that's just what politics is. But those are my questions for Mr. Bush. Thank you.
We're going to bring in the chief of police. Would you like me to also ask Kim Gardner to come over and speak on this?
Well, I've spent 2 months trying to get Kim Gardner's office to answer a question as to whether they're even prosecuting these cases, and they haven't answered that question.
But we
So
can.
I don't know if she'll zip right over here tonight. But
Well, I don't think she'll come tonight, but I believe we're within our authority to not only just ask her, and you would know the answer better, but if she refuses to come over, can we make her come over and talk? We just want to know simple, yeah, we could, well, that's what I'm just curious.
not tonight. We could.
No, not
yeah,
tonight,
yeah.
but I will try to invite her over and see if she'll come voluntarily.
I think that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Alderwoman was Middlebrook here? No, I'm sorry. Alderwoman Navarra. And I'm sorry, it actually jumped out of you on paper.
Quite all right, quite all right. Thank you, Mr. Bush. I have shared some of your same concerns as this process has been working itself out, and I do know that the sponsor of this bill has been working on a committee substitute to address some of those concerns. So if the enforcement section was struck from this bill, would that relieve the concerns that you have in terms of the situation that it puts the police in specifically? I think that was the section 6 that you were referring to at the beginning of your testimony.
I think it would protect the police. I would be concerned that it seems to prohibit the use of the courthouses that the city provides to the state courts from using those courts to prosecute state crimes. That would be a concern. I think it would protect the police. And again, I want to emphasize, these are preliminary judgments on my part, tentative judgments. I haven't studied this like I'd like to, but yes, that would be lots better.
Okay. And then it sounds like with the employment section, you don't have that many concerns. It's more in the implementation of it, but legally you didn't see concerns there?
I don't see a problem legally. If that was the essence of what you're trying to do, I think I would fold that into the civil rights ordinances. Those ordinance that prohibits discrimination on the basis of this and that and the other, just to add another category. And you'd have an enforcement method. We have a civil rights enforcement agency and a procedure, and I would think preliminary judgment only, that it could fit very neatly into that ordinance.
Okay, thank you. I think I do know that the sponsor is amenable to some of these things, so thank you. I appreciate your input, and I know we've got a lot of people here to speak, so I have no more questions. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. And what I would ask Julian is you, in the next whenever, and the sponsor, that maybe you guys talk about this.
I have not seen it.
And so I would say get together, set up a time, and that, so we're just not, it's just not an exercise. And, but anyway, thank you so much for your speaking. I would, at this point, then I'm going to ask the Craig Schmidt from the Health Department to come up, and Mr. Julian, you're certainly ready. You could stay or go.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my views with you.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
And Craig, and we're going to keep you a little bit shorter, just because we don't want to be here real late. But Craig's with the Health Department, represents the Health Department, and just to speak on behalf of what the Health Department has in mind.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So the Center for Health Information Planning and Research was asked to take a look at some of the research that's been done with regard to legalization of marijuana. You'll notice the first part indicates, by the way, please do, they told me that I should do this, there's a big fat asterisk at the end of the marijuana. So when you look at the very bottom, it will tell you that the published data should be considered preliminary because of the short period of time with the legalization of marijuana. Colorado, Washington were in 2012, and there's been some 6 additional states that have legalized it and so forth, and the laws vary and so forth. But so when the epidemiologists took a look at this, the first part is that yes, legalization of marijuana does seem to have a correlation with less opioid use, and you can see that in terms of the painkillers and so forth. They also, in the literature, looked about the impact on emergency room admissions and hospitalization increases and so forth with regard to that. The impact on the economy in terms of, I don't think there's anything in your legislation about taxing, but they went ahead and took a look at that in terms of that impact. Also impact on driving, the other impacts in terms of particular diseases, impacts on the developing teen brain, which I believe in your legislation it wouldn't be for anybody under 21, pregnancy, poisonings and so forth. So they went ahead and did that. I'm here merely as an opportunity to present information as you're considering any of this about what the community health impacts of such legislation might be.
Thank you. I'll just open it up. Does anybody have questions? Megan, did you have one? You look like you had something going there. Anyone going once? Craig, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate this information. I think what I'll do is copy it and make sure that.
We have it, if you'd like, Mr. Chairman, I can send that digitally.
Can you?
Sure, absolutely.
I think it's interesting. I mean, the part about the opioid use, being less, but, I appreciate that. And I would appreciate all the Board of Aldermen receiving this.
I'll
So
send it to you then.
Thank you.
Or is that the,
That would be cool.
great, thank you.
And no one has questions. So at this point, I believe those were the two that we had. Megan, if you want to start the list and start with, you can pick through the list and start with your more expert ones first if you would like, or we can go down the list. I know I have one business owner that I'd like to get up, as we start going back and forth. I think he signed up on there, isn't he? Dan, did you sign the paper? Wanna go straight? Well, I got one that wanted to speak that was a business owner. Did you still want to come up and speak? You can still come up and speak. Then we're just going to go straight down the list.
Thank you. My name is Dan Haggerty. I'm the owner of Old World Roofing Company, a small roofing contractor in the city of St. Louis. I have several concerns about this proposed bill. First and foremost is it's in direct contradiction to what the union tells me we can do. It's in direct contradiction what my workers' compensation company tells me we can do. Now, I know that these are totally separate entities, but my concern is a few years down the line, they're going to make me keep track of any work that I do in the city, above and beyond all other work, in an attempt to potentially charge me more money for workers' compensation because the people that potentially work in the city or come from the city may be under the influence of marijuana. I know a lot of people that's when you smoke pot, you smoke it the night before, you go to work the next morning. If you're a union man and a union man comes and drops on the whole job site, then you're going to be out of a job. And then who are they going to come after? Are they going to come after the union man? They're going to come after the employer. Because the city said it's okay to smoke dope at home the night before. So I think that we need to really look these things over. Another thing is, my question very simply is, what good would this do the city? And my last question is, would the city police officers be required to carry scales in their car? And when they pull somebody over, do they measure the amount of pot that they have, and then go from there? Thank you.
Well, hang on. Does anyone have questions for Dan?
I said just let him go ahead and testify, don't.
Okay. No, okay. So there are no questions, and they're asking for the sake of the meeting.
Just let people get.
And make sure you signed.
I did.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So, Megan, you just want to go straight down the list? And unless the committee really feels like it, we won't do questions then. But, and I do want to thank everybody. I really think that everybody here was very respectful, and I think that's a good thing. I think we can get through this. And it sounds to me like there's room to work in this bill. I mean, there's stuff that I was surprised about, even with the health department stuff. So, Mr. Chairman, why don't you start the top of the list and call them one down?
You're the chairman.
Well, no, I was going to ask he's going to call them down.
Patrick Mayfield.
Patrick, if you would just state your name
Patrick Mayfield.
and if you live in the city or not.
Live in the city. I'm a registered nurse. I got a master's degree in nursing. I'm a member of the American Society of Pain Management Nurses. So I take this pretty serious. This
pull
is
the
not about
microphone up
me.
because you're not-
This is not about me. This is about the patients that have asked me to come and speak on their behalf because they cannot make it here. Sure. Okay, so I'm speaking for the sick and the ill. First thing I want you all to consider is when people possess marijuana and are treated as criminals, they also too are arrested. So the patient could be arrested for holding a medicinal marijuana bag of goodies, so to speak. So if I know we're worried about the police, being also arrested for not carrying out the law, I'm worried about the patient who may be using this and also be treated as a criminal. It puts hardship on the families. It puts hardship on the patient. Now, as a nurse, I know my patients use this. I know humans use this. We all know people have been using this. Nobody has died from it, but let's look at its uses. The research shows that it can interfere with the pain pathway, reducing the use of opioids. The problem with opioids is they kill you. We have lost 70,000 people plus, which is more than we lost in the Vietnam War. It helps to alleviate pain, and it keeps people's clarity intact and not in an opioid infused haze at the end of life. Okay, and the next thing I'd also like to say it is the children with epilepsy. This plant has shown that it is effective against some forms of epilepsy. It doesn't cure them all, but it does help quite a few. There will always be those who it doesn't help at all. So I'm looking at it from a medical standpoint. The opioid deaths we're in a quagmire a bit with it because when people are in extreme pain, all we have to offer is opioid-based medication, which is highly addictive once that pain wears off and it starts to subside. People then are not prescribed that medication and turn to heroin. And heroin is a real problem right now, especially the heroin laced with fentanyl. These dealers don't care. So I'd like to also say that when this law, when prohibition continues, it is enforced lopsided. It's a lopsided enforcement of almost an archaic law now, where people of color and hippies were the target when this law came out. The hippies cut their hair, but you can't change the color of your skin. You're born with that, and you're a target. I just want to say, no applause, please. I'm thinking, what would happen if a policeman came down with cancer and had to take chemo and was throwing up, and the only thing that relieved it was some medicinal marijuana in maybe a vaporizer form or an edible form? Would he lose his job over this after recovery? I ask these questions because the laws are stated, but it's people we're dealing with, and it's people who are suffering. And when I step into states like Illinois, Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, I feel like we don't have the same rights. We are actually oppressed in a way that we don't have the same rights. And it's not fair, and it's un-American. So I just want to give you a list of medications where it's shown to help people. Crohn's disease, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cancer with nausea and vomiting, irritable bowel syndrome, intractable pain, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and it does show possible cures for cancer. We can't research it because it's still illegal. That's all I have to say. Any questions?
No, but thank you. And if you want to give us a list of what you have, we'll pass it amongst all the
I
aldermen.
can send it to you electronically. I have
That would be wonderful.
Would that be better? Okay.
Yeah, and
You want to do 2 minutes?
well, Megan, you want 2 or 3 minutes, except for some people that you said you need a little more time. So just let me know, otherwise, what, 2 minutes roughly? So we're going to try to keep it to 2 minutes if we can, unless Megan, you're one of Megan's experts that she wants to. So we're going to go straight down the list.
Cecil Kind. Cecil
She
King.
needs expert, okay. So this is one of Megan's experts, so we're going to give you a little more leeway.
Yes. My name is Cecil King. I am a board director of Greater St. Louis NORML. That is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. I thank the committee for having a testimony tonight. I'm a resident of St. Louis, a longtime resident. I'm in Ward 23,
Very
your
good.
ward, Vaquero, and I know that I've seen you at all times at the polls all the time, so it's nice seeing you here in a different setting here.
Thank you.
I support Board Bill 180, and I am not alone. Thousands and thousands of St. Louisans across the city have signed a petition for legal medical marijuana. Almost 10,000 people in the city of St. Louis have already signed this petition. And in fact, I think I saw some petitioners here tonight are taking up petitions. In the next 6 to 8 weeks, that number is going to climb to 26,000 plus St. Louis citizens who have signed this medical marijuana petition. It's a statewide petition sponsored by New Approach Missouri.
Will that, and I don't mean to disrupt, will that end up on the ballot then? So they're doing that in the state, right?
This is a statewide initiative for medical cannabis.
Right, and so does it look like the state's going to, it's going to be on the ballot?
I have a very high probability that it will be in, yes.
So if it's going to the state, I'll even sign it. I just don't know that we can do it here.
Well, I know that whenever you say legal marijuana to legislators, they have one overriding reaction, and that is fear. They always fear that legalized marijuana will create more crime, that drug gangs and will take over our neighborhoods, that the property values will fall, that citizens will just move out of the city. And I understand those fears. But it hasn't happened in the 30 states that have now passed legalized marijuana, and Colorado is a great example. People who voted for it in Colorado, but the legislators and the policy people, they didn't really want it. Even the governor didn't want it. They didn't want pot shops in their shopping malls, near grocery stores, near libraries, near residential communities. So they pushed all of these retail shops out to the fringes of the neighborhood. And those are areas that had basically high crime, lower income, lower property values, and they figured that those people are not going to complain about it. But something really interesting happened when they did that, and that was that crime started dropping wherever they put a retail marijuana shop. And it dropped as much as 17% on average. Now, this is in just those areas where they put them. Legalized marijuana had another interesting fact. Property values started going up. Wherever you put a retail cannabis shop in Colorado, prices went up, rent for warehouses went up, vacant storefront properties went up, and a lot of economic activity happened. Now, Missouri is not Colorado, and Board Bill 180 does not create retail cannabis shops, but Board Bill 180 can reduce crime in the city. The home cultivation provision can take away the drug money from gangs. When their gang members are selling to their customers pot that costs $350 an ounce, and their customers can actually grow it themselves for the cost of a tomato, they're not going to sell a lot of pot. Money is the lifeblood of gangs. BB 180 can take away all of these customers and make it very unprofitable for them to sell marijuana. It just won't be economically feasible. So finally, I would like to take the committee, offer the committees to take off their lawmaker hats and kind of put on their public policy hats. Legal medical cannabis is coming to Missouri. As a city, we need to start making policies that make sense. Our police officers' time can be better spent enforcing serious crimes such as gun violence, murders, assaults, burglary, and not the victimless crime of possession of marijuana. Whenever a police officer arrests somebody for this, does a citation, whatever, a record is produced, these people are not going to just seriously move out of the city. They're going to go back to their homes, and they're going to have a record. They're not going to be able to get a job, obtain houses, or get a loan. So that in itself is not increasing public safety. So,
We did, though, just, not to disrupt again,
Yes.
but we did pass an ordinance out of here making it, it's only $25, and it's a city court fine. So, I mean, a lot of that wouldn't hold true. And I agree with what you're saying, but you keep saying exactly what I think, state. If the state would do it, that would be, but I didn't know if you were aware, but we did pass an ordinance.
yes,
that-
Board
so-
Bill 193, right.
Right, so
Correct.
it wouldn't be, if you're caught with paraphernalia or less than an ounce of marijuana, which is quite a bit, you're not going to get anything other than what would be like a parking ticket. So it's not going to be on any records or anything like that. I know you said, and I just wanted to correct that.
Yes, right. Well, every interaction with a police officer costs the police officer more time. They're going to run a background check on this person to see if they have any warrants and whatever. They're going to waste a lot of time to write out a $25 ticket. Now, I just think that, and a lot of other people do, that when they spend this time to prosecute and go after these minor possession cannabis offenses, it's just a waste of time. We use hotspot policing where we take police officers from one part of the city and move them to another part. When we do that, we're depriving the city of the residents that the police were patrolling and putting it into another place. I think that Board Bill 180 does the same thing, except that it raises the bar a little bit so that 2 ounces and cultivation of cannabis is just simply not even looked at by the police, and they can concentrate on more things. So,
Thank you, I appreciate your testimony.
thanks.
Lou?
Mustafa Abdullah.
ACLU, so we're going to allow a little bit more time. Well, if you can keep it within 5 minutes or so, it'd be real nice.
Should be,
But we're going to allow time because,
great.
no, I know. Well, we want Megan's experts to have the same consideration that I gave to our city attorney, so.
All right, am I being picked up on the microphone?
You are, you're
Yeah,
awful tall,
okay.
but I think we can get you.
Yeah. I want to start off by thanking Chairman Vaccaro and members of the Legislation Committee for allowing me to come testify and to have this public hearing, and to thank Alderwoman Green for inviting me. My name is Mustafa Abdullah. I'm the lead organizer for the ACLU of Missouri. I also live right here downtown. So on behalf of the ACLU of Missouri and our 15,000 members statewide, I urge you to adopt Board Bill 180, a measure which redirects law enforcement resources and eliminates fees for marijuana possession. In the city of St. Louis, black individuals are 18.4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than white individuals. This disparity has grown over 200% from 2001. So I know that we believe that our city must reform, and there are a number of comments. There have been a number of comments made to that effect. The ACLU national policy opposes laws criminalizing the cultivation, possession, and use and sale or delivery of marijuana. So Board Bill 180 eliminates the fines for possession and directs law enforcement not to enforce low-level marijuana violations. We think that this is a step in the right direction. In order to better support racial equity, the elimination of fines is critical. Continued fines for possession would plague St. Louis with the same selective enforcement woes as current marijuana criminal laws. Those unable to pay fines could face arrest, imprisonment, and it perpetuates the criminalization of poverty. We also support Board Bill 180's direction for law enforcement to deprioritize marijuana violations. The use of marijuana amongst both black and white individuals is roughly equal. However, concentrated enforcement of marijuana laws based on a person's race or community through policies like zero tolerance and broken windows policing, as was mentioned earlier, continue to vastly over-police communities of color. Current enforcement practices impose arbitrary, cruel penalties for conduct for which no criminal penalty is appropriate, expose an individual to all the hardships of an arrest, often violate civil liberties through dubious searches, and further racial bias. The personal cost to those arrested is often significant and can linger for years. When people are arrested for possessing even tiny amounts of marijuana, it can affect their public housing and student financial aid eligibility and immigration status. This practice has not worked, it is not enforced equitably, and it should not be a priority for St. Louis. The war on marijuana has needlessly ensnared hundreds of thousands of people in the criminal justice system at tremendous human and financial cost. Between 2001 and 2010, there were over 8 million marijuana arrests in the United States, the overwhelming majority of which were for possession. That's one marijuana bust every 37 seconds. That level of enforcement has costs. So nationwide, states spend roughly $3.6 billion on marijuana possession enforcement yearly, despite the fact that marijuana legalization has no correlation to increased violent crime. In Missouri, this number is an estimated $50 million a year, money that could provide housing, public defenders, and more equitable schools. St. Louis has an opportunity to move forward, and it must do so with a racial equity lens. We must direct our police to where they are needed and spend resources where they show benefit. So I urge you to support Board Bill 180 and consider further actions to reevaluate the marijuana ordinances and reduce racial inequities. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. But again, everything you're giving us is state, but what I will do when the police chief comes in, I will ask for the numbers of people that have been arrested or prosecuted for marijuana charges to kind of get more of an accurate. And again, statewide, I don't think there's anybody in this group that doesn't 100% believe in medical marijuana. Again, I doubt you're going to find anybody that disagrees. You know, but anyway, that's just my thoughts, and I shouldn't talk. So that was they said. They told me not to. So
if I may, one thing that I would add is I know that there is concern about the state challenging this and taking it to court, which is a possibility. I also have been pleased to see advances being made in the state legislature, bipartisan advances, and increased discussion around medical marijuana and even the legalization of marijuana. So I think that the state is heading in the right direction,
and I support that, and I would sign that state petition. So that's certainly, she already did. That's certainly not a problem. I'm concerned about locally, and that's sort of where my issue comes in at. This is different than, some people say, well, but certain areas ban cigarette smoking. And the city did it, and then different areas. But when they did that, we knew that there was a whole bunch of other municipalities doing exactly the same thing at the same time. And yeah, if you can get Maplewood and Shrewsbury and Clayton and everybody to adopt similar ordinances at the same time, yeah, we'll make a message. I still think our best message is a resolution from the Board of Aldermen to Jefferson City, asking them to move forward with this on a state level. It's just my thoughts, and I apologize because I wasn't trying to keep the meeting without a lot of questions. But since I did, anybody? Oh, yes, Vice Chairman has. Wait, I'm gonna. I shouldn't have, but I did. So.
You can go through
Nobody else has questions. You were the only one.
Go ahead.
You were.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go back to my previous point. I don't have information directly from the circuit attorney about whether they're prosecuting possession charges, despite my best efforts and a letter from this committee to get that information. Fully 60 days ago now, we have not been provided with any data from the circuit attorney about whether they've been charging these cases. You might know, though, because you might interact with people who have been charged, and I'm told by people who have been in the office that Kim Gardner's office is prosecuting possession charges. So do you know, or do you have any info? And if they are, what's your opinion on the circuit attorney prosecuting possession of marijuana?
I do not know. I don't have any information about that. I mean, our position is we want that to be deprioritized. And so we would certainly discourage the enforcement of laws criminalizing the possession of marijuana, particularly low-level possession. So I would certainly discourage the city and the attorney from doing that.
And since you kind of, this came up from a couple speakers, so something some of my colleagues have expressed some concern about is if the policy within the city of St. Louis is that we don't police possession of marijuana, people are concerned that this becomes the easiest place to sell marijuana in a way that's not necessarily legal in this bill, but still safer, right? This becomes the exchange point for people who need to make a transaction, because Maplewood police will enforce that and Wentzville police will enforce it. But if you're in the city, well, they probably won't enforce it, so it leads to an increase in illegal drug dealing here, which I think maybe a lot of people support legalization of marijuana, support using it. They don't necessarily support people selling marijuana in front of their house, though, right? So that's a concern I've heard from some of my colleagues who think that will be, people will understand. I might live in Shrewsbury, but if I'm going to sell weed, do it in the city. And also we have to remember, this isn't a legalization bill. It's a don't enforce bill. So it's not going to change what the State Highway Patrol do, right?
Right.
It's not going to change what theoretically the FBI under Jeff Sessions does, right? So I think there's also a little bit of concern that you might be setting people up who don't have any nefarious intentions to cultivate and distribute large amounts of marijuana, but might drive around within their car because they think it's legal, and then they get arrested by the State Highway Patrol. So I think there's some concern that we're writing a check we can't cash, right? We're creating a system that is a little bit misleading for people that don't understand the nuances of how enforcement can actually work. So I'll just say that's another concern some of my colleagues have expressed. Thanks. Thank you.
And Mustafa,
Just to respond to that briefly.
Sure.
I think that that the misunderstanding is an important concern. I also think that there's, should the city decide to amend portions of the criminal code or to make changes to civil rights protection so that folks aren't discriminated against if they've been convicted of marijuana possession, things like that. If there's any area where there may be some confusion because we have a different ordinance from neighboring municipalities, then the onus is on community organizations like the ACLU and for our public officials to work together to do the education that's necessary. And I think that the room shows that we've got a lot of folks at least paying attention to this. And so, I think that there's an opportunity to do some public education.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I do have some of my comments written for the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Clerk? Megan, are we pretty much now back to 2 minutes now? Okay.
William Waller.
Okay, so Arch City, and we're going to give you a little more time again, but eventually we got to get down to 2 minutes or we will be here at midnight.
I'll try to be brief.
Can you keep it within about 5, you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let's go with 5.
So, yes, I am William Waller. I am a staff attorney with Arch City Defenders, generally a criminal defense attorney. I was a public defender in St. Louis City, and I actually have some data from them I'd like to provide to you regarding state criminal prosecutions for possession of marijuana, as well as some additional information regarding municipal prosecutions, since we deal with those all the time as well. So regarding Kim Gardner, I know she campaigned on a promise not to prosecute simple marijuana possession. That is not the case right now. I have data from the district defender, Mary Fox, in St. Louis City. They have at least 4 marijuana possession cases she's issued and 6 paraphernalia cases involving marijuana, which presumably would also be covered by this bill. They only have a small fraction of the actual such cases that are issued because, 1, all their clients have to be indigent, and 2, more importantly, they have to be incarcerated now for them to get a public defender on a misdemeanor. And the vast majority of people charged with this are released on a summons release or their own recognizance. So that's how we know that's a small fraction of the cases she's actually issuing. However, even if this isn't, well, let's say she decides, okay, under public pressure, I'm not going to prosecute marijuana cases. Joyce certainly loved to prosecute them. The next circuit attorney may well love to prosecute them, and someday she may decide she wants to prosecute them. That's no guarantee that this isn't an issue. But let's say there are no more state prosecutions for marijuana possession. Alderman Vaccaro, I believe you compared it to a parking ticket in municipal court.
Well, because my understanding from a board bill we just passed out of this same committee roughly 3 weeks ago changes it to a municipal offense. So they wouldn't be tried in state court at all. They'll be tried over at 1520 Market as a municipal offense.
Well, my understanding was a municipal offense was created to give an option, and ultimately the police decide where they go to seek charges. And then the prosecutor decides whether or not to issue. So there was the municipal offense created, I believe, a few years back, and they started issuing these like crazy in municipal court. This just changed the penalty for the municipal ordinance violation.
Yeah, knocked it down to $25, and it's similar to a parking ticket. I mean, I have no other way to say it because it doesn't show up on your record or anything. It's just a $25 fine.
Well, it does show up on your record. The cost is the same as a parking ticket, but certainly the collateral consequences are not. For instance, I've been engaging recently with Mills Property Management, and I got a copy. They're an enormous provider of housing around here, including project-based housing, subsidized housing. If they see a marijuana conviction on someone's record, and that includes municipal, that's an automatic denial for housing. And so I believe that, I think it's safe to say the same is probably true of other such providers of subsidized housing. So the same people who are getting these tickets and getting these convictions are the ones who are going to be denied the only housing they can afford because of it. And it's basically an automatic denial. You also lose access to federal benefits because the feds don't care that this is a municipal ordinance violation. They don't care if you get a suspended imposition of sentence. They count it as a conviction. So any federal benefits that are conditioned on that, you will lose access to if you get this $25 ticket. The same is not true of a parking ticket. Finally, I'll also add, there's another issue at play here because I look at this bill as a regulation of the police department. We have local control. We get a say in how our police department operates. This is not really about marijuana. And in that regard, I think a fact that people don't talk about often enough is that the SLMPD practices stop and frisk. It's just like New York. We don't call it stop and frisk. We don't have the same sort of attention paid to it, but that's their practice. Zero tolerance policing, as Mustafa alluded to, and it's predominantly in poor black neighborhoods where they're stopping people for this sort of thing. They're not going to wash you, or they're not going to wash you housing in the city. They're not going to SLU campus to bust people for this. And this bill removes a primary pretext that police officers use for this practice of stop and frisk. And I think that is absolutely critical to understand and to support because we do have a crisis of policing in St. Louis. We have one of the most violent police departments, statistically speaking.
I would disagree with that. And I'm just telling you, I disagree with that, but we're still talking about this particular bill.
And
not our
this
police
bill
department.
does regulate police behavior, so I think we need to focus on that aspect of it.
And I thought the city attorney said that we can't do that. But, and again, I apologize. I'll just go ahead and let you speak, but I do think any opinions about the police or anybody else are not part of this?
Well, I think police practices and the extent to which the Board of Aldermen can regulate them through local control are absolutely part of this. So I would just submit that we should have more of a say in how our police do business, who they're targeting, who is getting these tickets, who is getting these convictions. And this is, I think, the primary means through which we can do that.
Okay, hang on.
I have a question. This is back to the property management company.
Yes.
If, as a property owner, property manager, if I choose not to lease to someone that smokes cigarettes, is that legal?
I don't know whether or not it would be. I can't say. I know the Fair Housing Act does cover sort of, if you deny someone housing for criminal convictions and that disproportionately affects certain types of people, which would seem to be the case in St. Louis, that can be a Fair Housing Act violation.
So I'm talking about cigarette smoking, I guess, that you know, I guess my point is, even if we would legalize the marijuana and somebody smokes marijuana and I don't want smoking in my property, would that be discrimination?
I believe you might run into trouble under the Fair Housing Act, yes. That's different for project-based housing, for instance, than it is for just your random landlord subletting to, or letting to.
You're talking about like HUD housing, subsidized housing, okay.
And
That's interesting. I never realized that because, I mean, if you're talking about the health and safety of people living in close quarters, it seems as though it would be the better of the two to not allow it than to allow it.
I mean,
Just my thought. You know, I just throwing that in there because I just, you know, smoking is smoking, whether it's marijuana or cigarettes or whatever, and if you don't allow it on your property, you don't allow it on your property. But just a point to consider.
And just to elaborate on that, the way they do this is they literally contract with a national corporation that runs your criminal records, and if they see one, automatic denial. So the removal of these tickets would remove that automatic denial for people affected. That's the mechanics of it.
Okay.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you. To your points about police policy and municipal prosecutions, I would kind of reiterate what I said about the circuit attorney. We also don't have to prosecute these things at the municipal level either. We did prior to 2013. We didn't have a local ordinance for municipal prosecutions. We created that. And we have prosecuted quite a few people at the municipal level for possession. Just as a policy, we could stop doing that tomorrow, couldn't we?
It depends what you mean by we. Certainly the city councilor,
Right.
Julian Bush, could
Yes.
say, you do not issue any more of these cases when the cops bring you issue the tickets.
Effectively, the mayor's office could say that's the policy now, that we're not going to do municipal prosecutions of.
And I wish they would.
So just point out that that's a way, without legislation, that we could essentially achieve the same goal. And I would also say, in terms of police policy, certainly public safety director and chief of police can say, don't make arrests for possession. You know, don't gather evidence for marijuana possession.
They could. I think it would conflict with so long as we have this stop and frisk policing, there's a huge incentive to use any existing tools, and this is one of the primary ones. I can't count the number of preliminary hearings that I've either conducted or witnessed where the stop was based on the smell of marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yes, they could. I don't think they will.
But the important thing is they could.
They could, yeah, they could make efforts in that regard.
Yeah.
I think ultimately the prosecutors are the only ones who could put a stop to it.
Right. If our municipal prosecutor, the city attorney, or our circuit attorney never issued charges, either misdemeanor charges or municipal charges, eventually the police would stop gathering evidence and stop bringing probable cause to issue those charges, I would assume.
They probably, but they would still use it as probable cause that would potentially lead to a search. If I want to search someone's car, I say I smelled marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I know I can't get someone to issue on that case, I'm going to say, you've violated the law and search your car. Maybe I'll find a harder drugs, maybe I'll find a gun, maybe I'll find you have warrants. So they're absolutely going to use it in that respect, even if they're not issuing these cases.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman,
Oh,
could I
hang
ask-
on, I'm
could I ask a
sorry.
quick question? I'm sorry. Thank you.
So,
Regarding the question about housing, it looks like this bill would prohibit use if a landlord puts in a lease or otherwise notifies the tenants that they're not allowed to be smoking marijuana on the premises. It wouldn't be allowed, is that correct?
That would be a matter of civil contract. Yeah, I think this bill wouldn't affect that.
Okay, I mean, I think it's in section 3 here, it says that that wouldn't be allowed if it's not allowed in the lease. So I think to the Alderwoman's point that this isn't going to allow somebody to smoke marijuana in an apartment building where it's been prohibited by the property owner. Is that's my reading. I'm just curious if that's correct.
I would agree with that. My point about housing was more about discriminating against people for past convictions. But I would agree, yes, civilly you can contract, you can't do this in the apartment. That would apply to marijuana as well, even if we couldn't send the police after someone for it.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that clarification.
thank you.
Thank you.
Megan, we're going to get down to the 2-minute stuff now? Okay, but I mean, otherwise, we're going to be here till midnight.
Joshua Canavan.
Okay, Joshua, you got a couple minutes? Joshua? And you can time. So we're going to try and keep them down to 2 minutes, please.
Good evening. I'm going to be quick because everything I was going to say has been covered. I would like to reiterate, though, absolutely with the housing. Do appreciate the point that was made over here. I used to work for the same nonprofit. I'm in private practice now. I used to work for the same nonprofit Mr. Waller did. Had a client that had a son that was 22 years old, not on the lease in project-based housing, was stopped and frisked, either coming or going from the building. Mom was a single mom, had, I believe, 2 or 3 kids under 14. His municipal marijuana conviction was attributed to her apartment. Because of that, the breaking of the law term in the lease, she was basically a single mom, and 3 children were rendered homeless because of that. I think we have to ask ourselves what our priorities are in that case. Now, again, you could still say we're not going to smoke marijuana there. That doesn't really cover the scenario in which I just put forth, where this 22-year-old son that was visiting had a dime bag and got stopped by the police. And then also I think the other important point to point out is the impact on federal aid for students. Absolutely, I had a friend in college that was arrested with a small dime bag out in St. Louis County. The ordinance out there was very similar to the one the city has now, and the collateral consequences are he was going to lose his FAFSA, but for being able to get the judge to set aside. So basically, he didn't want to tell his parents, pled guilty. They gave him an SIS, which is the lowest level probation that they say won't be a conviction, but as far as FAFSA is, absolutely is. And he was lucky enough to be able to hire an attorney, get that set aside, which some judges will do, some judges won't. He was fortunate enough to have that happen, and then have an amended, basically be fined a higher amount to avoid the conviction and continue on. He's a physical therapist now. I know that I'm from solid middle class. If I ever would have had that happen to me, I wouldn't be standing in front of you with a law degree. So why put people behind an 8-ball anymore over, a small amount of marijuana? So that's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, next.
Rob Kramer.
And if you could say if you live in the city or not, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Rob Kramer. I have lived in the city of St. Louis for over a year. I'm in Ward 24, Dogtown neighborhood. Many of my points, too, have been spoken about already, so I will give the abridged version. One thing that I'd like to mention that I don't think has been brought up today is the influx of people coming to St. Louis if this board bill were to be passed. I've met with a number of friends and family members that have worked in California and Colorado in the medicinal and recreational marijuana industries, gain valuable skills in growing marijuana that would love to move to the city if this board bill were passed. I think that's a great thing for the city, especially looking at some of the statistics of people leaving the city over the past 10, 20, 30 years. Being from outside of the city, not from Missouri, it's kind of alarming moving here and seeing those statistics. Another thing that I think would be interesting is if this were to pass, I might be interested in growing marijuana myself. I think in that pursuit, I would be able to and needing to buy supplies from local businesses. My family believes in buying from local vendors when possible, and this would be able to support some of our local hardware stores, landscaping companies potentially, companies like that, especially in the winter months where their business is seasonally down. Would give opportunities for that. Along those lines, I think I would ask you to consider this board bill for the many positives that it could bring to the city of St. Louis. I think, in my understanding of the city, it's very progressive and it's a leader in the bi-state area. One concern that I've heard from the board is allow the state to decide, allow national to kind of take care of it for us. I find a lot of hypocrisy with the federal government in saying that they find no medicinal value in marijuana, yet they operate a farm for its study at the University of Mississippi and have so for over 30 years. That is my points. Thank you very much for your consideration and your time.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk.
Dan Haggerty.
He already came.
Already here. Gary Wiegert.
My name is Gary Wiggert, 35-year veteran police officer, retired. Before this, I was a lobbyist for Show Me Cannabis for 2 years. I was a board member for New Approach, Missouri, and I was also director of security over at a cannabis farm over in Shelbyville, Illinois.
Do you still live in the city?
I still live in the city. I stayed at a little place on the lake there. Oh, you mean where I live now?
Yes.
Yeah, 7th District. I think I'm the 7th Ward committeeman, Republican.
Very good, okay.
So I understand that the things that I was against in this bill where the police were restricted, my understanding that's been taken out and gone. And am I wrong on that?
Oh, okay.
And my understanding it's going to be changed for the businesses too?
Well, she's going to work with the attorney. I think you'll see.
So, and I would
changes.
never support a bill that forced the police to do something that would be against their sworn duty. So my understanding with that stricken out, I do support that. And I think whether this bill passes or not, it's important that we are up front on this and are out in front of it, because I think it may pass in a few months if there's a referendum, and if not, it's going to be coming up the next couple of years. I saw how the 2 years I worked on it, how it progressed even in the legislature at the time. So I just want to come and speak in support of that bill. To fill in some of the questions that you all were asking, there's a lot of laws that the city picks up that were state violations: driving while license suspended, revoked license, DWI became a DUI. And also in regards to the housing, I was in the housing unit for 3 years, drove around the projects. And people who were in violation of marijuana, we did in fact kick them out. I mean, if you're going to live there under the government rules, you should obey the rules. So I abided by those rules, and I think that's the proper way to do that. And thank you for supporting this bill. And this is going to be something that's going to be coming up. You're going to be hit with this real soon, and you probably should have a leg up on this.
On the state level.
Yes, on the state level, we did get it passed where there's 2 places right now in Missouri that can grow it for children with epilepsy. And so this will just keep breaking down. But the state level is going to, I believe, authorize this in the near future. So we should have heads up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk.
Karen Chester.
My name is Corinne Chester, and I'm the Executive Director for Greater St. Louis Normal. I'm also the Outreach Coordinator for New Approach, Missouri, and the President of the Missouri Cannabis Industry Association. I would offer to you that the most dangerous thing about marijuana is that it is against the law. It is a plant that is used medically in dozens of cases of illness. Somebody else already pointed out quite a few of those. I do not currently live in the city. I used to live in the city. I now live in Jefferson County. If Board Bill 180 passes, that will change. I have rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease. My doctor right now would like me to be on low-dose chemotherapy. When I was on it before, my hair came out. I was really sick all the time. Right now, I can be treated with CBD oil If I lived in a legal state, I could be treated with CBD oil and not require low-dose chemotherapy. I was diagnosed at a very young age, so I actually have rheumatoid, osteo, and degenerative arthritis. I'll be 48 in April. I was diagnosed when I was 32. For me, access to legal marijuana is a life or death situation. When I take the pharmaceutical medication that they prescribe for me, I cannot function. I can barely leave my house. I certainly can't be the executive director of anything. So I would say that for me personally, it's very meaningful. Board Bill 180 is very meaningful. I would also say that for people who use marijuana recreationally, not having to face the risk of being incarcerated for doing so would be very meaningful. Marijuana is against the law because it's a Schedule I substance. To be a Schedule I substance, it has to be classified as having no medical value and a very high risk of abuse. If all substances were evaluated equally, I'm certain that alcohol and tobacco would be on that list and marijuana would not. 64,000 people in 2016 died from drug overdoses. Not one single one of those was from cannabis. Not one. It is not possible for anybody in this room to consume enough cannabis for it to kill them. For me, I can consume enough that I can actually live my life if I live in a place where it's legal for me to do so. And that's really what I wanted to say.
Thank you. And just off the subject, just for those that have been interested in the 8th election results, they texted me so far with the absentee in, it's 56% Fadler and 43% Rice with the absentee, and I know some of the committee members, and I think we happen to do this on an election night. Let's go. So,
Brett Narayan? Nurian?
how many?
Hello, my name is Brett Narayan. I'm the secretary of the Clayton Tam Community Association, and I'm an attorney by trade. I live here in the city. I'm here tonight to urge you to pass Board Bill 180. Passing Board Bill 180 will strike at the heart of the two-tiered justice system that we have now, where haves and have-nots have completely different outcomes based on the same actions that they take through our criminal justice system. When people can afford someone like me to defend them against these low-level marijuana cases, we quickly amend it to a charge like littering. They go on with their lives like nothing's happened. When someone can't afford someone like me, these have devastating, lifelong consequences. Earlier, you likened a ticket for marijuana to a parking ticket. And that, while it's a common thought, it's just incorrect, with all due respect. These municipal violations affect housing, they affect student loans, they affect scholarships, they affect employment, and they affect people's immigration statuses. They also affect sentencing for other criminal acts in the future. So if someone had a conviction for marijuana possession in the future in any other unrelated case, that previous conviction could be used to enhance sentencing in the next case, essentially. And so, in effect, by passing this, you could really change people's lives in a meaningful way. Ultimately, this bill is not about marijuana. It's about the allocation of resources in the city of St. Louis and police enforcement priorities, which you guys absolutely can control. The city councilor came and spoke on, some of the very small issues that they may have, but ultimately anything is likely to end up in court at some point, and the severability portion of this legislation will allow portions of it to be struck down and to continue with the real purpose of it.
We're trying to keep everybody 2 minutes, and
Absolutely.
if you could wrap up real quick.
Oh, sure
I'd
thing.
appreciate it.
So ultimately, this board moved in 2014 to decriminalize marijuana in the city. That actually resulted in more enforcement. We saw more citations written as a result of that. So passing this board bill will be able to undo a wrong that this board did some years back, and I'll wrap up with that. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you.
Reginald Garth?
No, he's calling for Reginald Garth. Reginald? We're going to try, because we still got quite a few speakers, so we're going to try and keep them in a couple minutes if we could, please.
Of course. Thank you, Chairman Vaccaro, members of the board. My name is Reginald Garth. I am from the 28th Ward with Heather Navarro as my alderman. And I stand here this evening instead of Representative Peter Meredith. He sent the board a letter, and I wish to read just a portion of it into record. I have copies of it here for each of you.
Sure. And we can ask Peter to come to a meeting. We can hold meetings at different times and do something that, when they're not in Jeff City.
Of course. It's a 3-page letter. As I said, I'll just read just a portion of it for time constraints.
Please.
To the honorable members of the Board of Aldermen Legislation Committee, I'm writing today to offer my support for the bill in front of you regarding the decriminalization of marijuana in St. Louis City, and to provide my perspective on the subject as legislator working in Jefferson City. I would be there in person for this hearing, but am otherwise engaged in the midst of session and budget hearings and committee hearings of my own today in the Capitol. After reviewing this fairly modest board bill, I would like to strongly add my support for any effort in St. Louis City to decriminalize or legalize marijuana. The note goes on to address other concerns. We just said that this is where a progressive city like St. Louis has a real opportunity to lead. And he goes on further to say that please don't resist this opportunity to make a positive change to our outdated and counterproductive marijuana laws because of what you fear the state may do in response. Let those of us elected to represent St. Louisans at the state level do our jobs if that time comes. I would very much welcome the conversation at the state level if it is forced by the city, and I believe we would all benefit from this conversation across the state. In the meantime, I also believe my constituents and yours would be benefited by our city removing criminal penalties for the possession and use of marijuana. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think what I'll do is see, do you work with him up in Jeff City?
No, sir, I do not.
Well, I'll call him. I mean,
I was
we'll-
asked by,
We'll see if we can get Peter to come down and talk to us,
of course.
because I'm sure we'll have questions for him.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you so much. Yeah, oh, yeah.
Robert Riley?
Good evening. My name is Robert Riley. I am a certified alcohol and drug counselor in the state of Missouri, also internationally certified drug and alcohol counselor. I represent the Missouri Network for Opiate Reform and Recovery over in the 20th Ward, MO Network. We are the designated recovery support center for the St. Louis region through Department of Mental Health. So I'm not going to go into all the reasons why. What I will say is I know there's been concerns on why the city should take this up versus the state. And I'll just remind that when we passed, with the help of Jennifer Joyce, former Mayor Slay, and the Board of Aldermen, the 9/11 Good Samaritan in the city, it was still against state law. Now, did we go on to pass it? Yes, we did. It took us 6 years to pass that legislation. I just came from Jeff City today where our syringe access bill cleared the House, so it was passed in the House and it's moving on to the Senate. but also to remind you of the prescription drug monitoring program that the state, that we fought for years in the state to get passed and was held up by one state senator. And so what we did was we partnered, Chad and I went to Steve Stinger. He was the first to do it. And then the city of St. Louis did it. And now we have 73% of the state covered under local ordinance prescription drug monitoring program. We still don't have a state prescription drug monitoring program, and I don't see one being passed anytime soon. So that's why I'm asking the board to pass this so that we can start approaching other municipalities and do it in that fashion. Because most of the state, you guys know, most of the state legislature is represented by rural areas, state legislators from rural areas, and they're never going to take up legalizing marijuana or decriminalizing it, not in the near future anyways. But if we can do this through local municipalities, that's the way we can start to affect the change. And that's why I'm asking the board to start that process here. Besides, it's just good, smart policy. Harm reduction works. Harm reduction works. I see we have 25 to 50 people that come into our outreach center every single day. When we meet them right where they're at, we hand them naloxone. You know, I could go into the whole opioid and how cannabis helps with that, but when we meet them where they're at with naloxone, if we could do the same with folks that are using marijuana to treat their opioid addictions, it's the same thing. They're five times more likely to enter treatment. That's what I have for you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Clark?
John Chasnoff.
Do you live in the city?
No, I don't live in the city. I live in St. Louis County, University City.
Should move back. It's a good place to live.
I have,
just
right, I do have a lot of interest in the city and a lot of concern for city welfare, and I do believe that as a region we function together in many ways, and so I appreciate you hearing my voice. A lot of folks have spoken today with more policy expertise on this subject than I have, so I thought I'd speak a little bit more personally as both an old hippie and as an activist. I think as an activist that I sometimes have to make a choice. I look at issues and I see that some of them are going to take a long time to get past, that we're going to have to pass the baton on to other generations. It's going to take a long time to change community attitudes, and those are long-term marathon things we have to work on. I don't feel like this issue is like that. I realized that marijuana was not, reefer madness that it was sold to me as in 1967. And so I think most of my generation realized, the baby boomers realized, that this was essentially a harmless drug, and that we vowed that when we became adults, we were going to change the laws. And so now as we age, we haven't succeeded in that. And to me, it's a shame that we haven't. This is not an issue that we have to change public opinion. It is basically self-evident that this is, that we have outdated policies, that Richard Nixon set this up as a Schedule I drug in the 60s for nothing but political reasons, and that we've been living with that legacy ever since. So to me, it's high time that we make a change. We had a presidential candidate in 1992 who, admitted that he smoked marijuana. And that was like 4 presidents ago, over quarter of a century ago, that even on that level, this was not something damaging to his political career to admit. And so we are living with laws that are self-evidently wrong and they need to change. I also, in 1979, I joined a spiritual community. And our spiritual community believed that marijuana was a vehicle for spiritual enlightenment. Now, that might not be a commonly held belief. I'll try to finish up.
We're trying to hold everybody 2 minutes.
I hear you.
Can you wrap it up?
I'll try to wrap up. So we believe that marijuana was a spiritual vehicle. And I haven't smoked now for over 20 years, but I still believe that it's my religious right to smoke marijuana if I so choose. Yes. I hear some of the political concerns coming out of this group, but I want to make two quick points on that front. The first is that we can't allow the circuit attorney's office to be the discretionary body here because a factor of arrest is too destructive to people's lives. And secondly, we do have local control, and I thought William Waller spoke well to the subject of that this is essentially about regulating the police, and that's an authority that we do have. I think that we could win the case in court. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next. Brad Barker.
Brad, if you could do your best. If you can do your best to try to keep it a couple minutes.
Absolutely.
That'd be nice.
Chairman Vaccaro, thank you. My name is Brad Baker. I am a resident of the 26th Ward and a candidate for the Missouri State Representative for the 84th District. I am also an attorney here in St. Louis City, and I have given numerous presentations on changing marijuana laws in the United States on this issue. Chairman Vaccaro, I first want to address, I absolutely hear and understand your concern about it would be best to address this at the state level. That would be certainly ideal. However, we can bring justice to the local level sooner rather than later. And I think that's important because even if medical marijuana ultimately does pass in the fall, whether by the state legislature or by a referendum, then it will still only be medical marijuana, and there will still be the possibility of prosecution for the minor crimes that so many great speakers have already talked about this evening. Justice delayed is justice denied. We have the opportunity to fix this now for people, and I think it's an important criminal justice reform that we need to address as soon as possible. Secondly, at its core, this bill is simply about enforcement priorities. And much has been written in changing marijuana laws about enforcement priorities being an area that government entities can address in their own time. Alderman Ogilvie, you talked about preemption issues and concerns there, which are understandable. But at the same time, when you are setting enforcement priorities as a governing legislative body, the key is that that has been upheld. And in fact, there have been recent decisions by both the Massachusetts Supreme Court and a federal court out of Connecticut that have said despite the federal government having it as a Schedule I drug under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, state law is not preempted by the federal law. And it gives cities and states an opportunity to operate and say, here is what our enforcement priority will be. And I think that's important because our enforcement priority should pull back and realize we have better priorities as a city to address. And while I understand that I believe the committee substitute is pulling out the employment piece, I do want to address one other issue that has not been spoken about yet, and that is numerous states have actually implemented protections for employees for off-duty, no impairment in the workplace, but off-duty marijuana usage. And those states include Minnesota, Arizona, Washington, D.C. has also done so, New York.
So we got you there.
And finally, just across the river in Illinois. So this is actually a local, this has been addressed by employers locally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're getting closer.
Robert Vroman.
And again, thank everyone for keeping their applause and thoughts down. It
I
makes
live
it
in,
move faster.
I'm Robert Vroman. I live in the 22nd Ward.
Sure.
I'm the Missouri Republican State Committee Man for the 4th Senate District. I own 37 properties across North St. Louis City. I've been doing business in North St. Louis full-time for 7 years. I've lived in the 22nd Ward for 2 years. The number one problem facing North St. Louis in every American inner city is the bad consequences of prohibition. An increasing number of Republicans agree with me that marijuana criminalization has been an expensive, disastrous, and futile crusade of dubious motivation. I therefore applaud Board Bill 180 and any efforts at any level of any government to end the drug war as fast as humanly possible. Thank you.
Thank you for being quick.
Stephanie Kuzme.
Hi there.
Hey, Stephanie, how you doing?
I am a citizen of the 10th Ward. I've lived in St. Louis City for over 20 years. However, I just got back from living in Colorado and Hawaii. I got very excited when I saw Board Bill 180 when I was living in Colorado. I said, if that passes, I'm happy to move back to St. Louis City. I feel like coming here today just to tell you that I support this bill, and I support ending the drug war, and I support ending the discrimination against people who do smoke cannabis, which is a plant that grows out of Mother Earth. Just to tell you that this is the only way I feel like I can be an activist, to come here and stand before you and tell you that I believe this should be, that this is the only way for us to start, is to just start from the root level and go forward. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.
No, thank you.
Coffee Wright.
Hello.
Hi, Coffee, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good, thank you. I like to say that with this Bill 180, we know that it's an enforcement bill versus, he called it enforcement versus
decriminalize.
Right. Okay. And my thoughts and my feelings are that, first of all, it goes by supply and demand. Now, the people that are supplying it are the ones that are suffering the consequences. What about all the people that's smoking it, but they get to go on with their lily life? They're not getting these consequences. So most of the people that came up, they've already pointed out that to us, as well as the type of prosecutions that we're facing when you're caught with marijuana and all that. They pointed out the housing. It's legal in 29 states. That's for a reason. St. Louis is behind. We got to play catch up, okay?
We're a city, though.
Well, we're a city, I understand that. But I anticipate it becoming a legal state law.
I hope so.
It will if I have anything to do with it. I'm running for state senator, and that's the first thing on my bill. We will legalize it, family.
Let's don't do the
Okay,
clapping.
but in addition to that, not one person, unlike cigarettes, not one person has died from smoking marijuana. You have to smoke 1,500 pounds in 15 minutes, and I don't think nobody can do that. I don't think nobody carry that much on them. So I would like for you to take that into consideration, Chairman, and the rest of the board. Also, another thing that concerns me, when we talk about jobs and things such as that, I think legalizing, just passing this bill would help, it would give us more push on a state level, and it would create more jobs, because all these people out here selling marijuana, you know, maybe they can start growing it or open their own marijuana store, and that would be a big business. That would create a lot of jobs, put a lot of families together, because it is a supply and demand situation. You know, the ones that are getting these tickets are not the ones that's just using it.
Even under this bill, you can't do that. But
Well, I know we can, but that's the ultimate goal, you know, I would think. You know, that's my ultimate goal, is just to make it, to legalize it, period. You know, so that's what I wanted to share, along with everything that everyone else has already added to it. And so I'm in full support of Bill 180, and I hope that you all take strongly consideration of everything that we all has come up and said. And I'm Coffee Wright, and that's right, I said it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amber Coate.
Hello, Amber.
Good evening.
Good
I'm
evening.
Amber Cole. I'm from the 21st Ward, and I guess I'm the odd one out of the bunch because I'm not in support of this. Maybe I'm from the old school. I'm a recovering person in recovery for 30 years.
Oh,
And
good.
also had family currently and in the past have suffered from addiction and substance use disorder. And some of the comments that was made, it was true that you haven't died from, specifically from marijuana, but the effects of it is different. It also grows into different things. So I'm asking, unless we, I don't know, some of the parts of the bill might sound fine. However, when you live in a community that is swamped by addiction and substance use, and we haven't addressed that, until you change the behavior of all of this, you know, we're still going to have a mess. So I'm totally against it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and congratulations. Mr. Clerk?
Anthony Brescia.
Thank you. And you got my name right. That's amazing. So I'll keep this short if I can. It is unethical, immoral, and insane to criminalize a diversely useful and medically vital plant. I have a friend with MS. She's tried 11 drugs. I can't pronounce all of them. Some of the side effects would make you sick or cry. So she uses cannabis. She eats, smokes, and uses it topically so she can feel her legs. She's in a wheelchair. And the side effects are health and function. Patrick here listed many of the medical uses, but one that's important besides cancer research, everyone in this room knows someone who's had cancer or will or has it now. It regenerates cells neurobiologically. For cancer and for any neurological disease, this drug is essentially amazing. I don't use it recreationally anymore, sadly, but I do use it medically, illegally, but not really illegal in the city. It's a waste of resources for the police. We've covered that. The utilities of the hemp plant, while this isn't the focus of this, industrially, the utilities are legion, specifically for sustainable building materials, paper and foodstuffs, and that includes animals. It's completely renewable as paper, and I don't think this panel has the ignorance that the climate crises are real and dangerous. And it's also, few people notice, it's excellent for soil retention and prevents erosion. Downtown already smells like Amsterdam, so I don't know why. And that's not actually a joke, and I'm not trying to offend anyone, but you know, I've been to Amsterdam 3 times and downtown 244. Anyway, I also think that, you know, it's reasonable for black people, reasonable adults at the end of the day, to be able to smoke a joint after all the institutional racism and segregation that we may be working on but needs to be improved. And then again, I'll end again with what I started. It is unethical, immoral, and insane to criminalize a diversely useful and medically vital plant. I thank you.
Thank you. And is this the last one?
This is the last one.
This is-
Jason Goldcamp.
Jason, you're the last on our list. You're timing yourself?
I don't want to take up too much of your time. So many people have said so many great things already. I feel I should respond to the union contractor if he's still here.
He's not, but I do know that the unions
Well,
have concerns.
I was a union worker, Local 36, and you know, you can work high on painkillers. I know I was prescribed painkillers for about 3 years. So you can have a union worker out there high out of his mind on pain pills, totally okay. But if a union guy goes home and smokes pot to relieve his pain and goes to work the next day, totally sober, I mean, come on, you know where I'm going. And then I also heard, you know, excuses like, you know, we're gonna be here all night. Like, there's so many people here. Like, how often do you get this many people down here about an issue? I mean, people are passionate about this for all the reasons that have already been covered. I've had 2 cousins die from heroin, and their parents both support legalization of marijuana because when marijuana is legal, opioid use goes down. It's just proven. And then lastly, I want to ask you, do you want to be on the right side of history? Do you want, no. Do you want to be, I mean, historically, do you want to be viewed as like people who are against desegregation? Do you want to be viewed as people against civil rights? Because it's pretty clear where we're headed. And voting against this is voting against the right side of history. So please be on the right side of history.
Thank you. That was it, and I believe, did anybody forget to sign up? I would give either one of you 2 minutes, and then we're gonna wrap it up. We're gonna be out by 8:30, so.
I live downtown St. Louis. No problem. And I was iffy about the bill because, to me, the bill points directly at people that
Oh,
look like me.
can you come talk to us?
Okay.
You'll be off the TV, and we won't have you on the microphone? or
I live
anything?
downtown St. Louis, and when I saw this bill, somebody posted on Facebook, and I immediately thought, well, this gonna catch up the youngsters. This gonna catch up the people that look like me. Like, if you live in public housing, I'm a kidney transplant patient. They gave me them medicines, the walls was crawling. I can't take Percocet. Make me lose my mind. Can't go to work on that. You understand? So I was against it at first because I know all reality, it's a way to get money out of, I guess I ain't really middle class at like $10,000 a year, $12,000 a year, so I don't know where I fall. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I just want y'all to think about that. Like, police will pull you over because they smell marijuana. You don't even have to have anything on you. They could just smell it. So
I know, they have.
I'm
they have-
50-50 with the bill. The other part I like about the bill is I went to school for culinary arts. Had I known if I had came out of school and could make weed treats and help somebody on dialysis like I was for 10 years because I had a baby, then I would have did that straight out of culinary art school. But I couldn't see the future where weed was going. So I just wanted to let that be known.
Thank you. And I need you to sign this, and you'll be the last person, and then we're going to cut this off at 8:30. But again, everybody that wanted to cheer, I appreciate you did, and it makes it go a little better.
My name's John Friedberg. I don't know what ward I'm in, but I live in Tower Grove. I've lived in California, excuse me, Colorado, a little bit in Boston. I noticed in California different, not necessarily cities, but districts or counties do have different laws. So something can be done, not just on the state level. Also, I've noticed when I lived in Colorado how much the arts district improved, just how many more jobs there were for artists, because there seems to be a correlation with creativity and poverty for some reason, but it can only help the economy. And crime in St. Louis is not, it doesn't need to get any worse. So, that's all.
Well, thank you. And again, well, okay, I'm going to make very quickly because everybody does have somewhere to be. Try and keep it under a minute if you would.
Because I got to go to the bathroom anyway.
Okay.
So
Very briefly, please.
Oh, yeah.
And then that'll be it, because 8:30 we're cutting this off.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, well, I lived in the city and county for 64 years. I've got PTSD, and that would help me out a lot with that. And I was on Percocet, the strongest dose, for like about 6 years. And then when I went off of it, if I could have had, cannabis, that would have helped me a lot. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm going to end it right here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'll sign it as a sentence. Would this help with tax revenue for the city if we could legalize?
Not because on this bill, you can grow and sell it to anybody you want with no taxes.
Okay, thank you.
So,
There's no selling in this bill.
I mean, you can't sell it, you can give it away. There's
But
no
maybe it would
taxes
pave the
involved.
way for a revenue stream in the future.
No, not if it,
Not from
not
this
if the
bill,
state,
but form a
but-
structural building block towards that.
We're here to learn, and I actually have learned a few things tonight. And I don't know that I support this, but I do think I want to further research and see what we get.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me throw that sentence
No,
out
that's
there.
fine. Anyway, thank you all. This meeting's adjourned, but thank you all for coming.